There's one trait that makes people stop taking you for granted, and fear losing you instead. Most people spend their lives trying to be liked, agreeable, or useful, but they forget a dangerous invisible law. Fear of losing you is far stronger than admiration, respect, or loyalty. Today, we will expose the secret that silently elevates your influence, the trait that transforms how people perceive, treat, and value you. People don't fear what they respect. They fear what they cannot replace. Machiavelli understood this instinctive truth centuries ago. Power lies in scarcity. Kings, generals, and visionaries throughout history have known this. Those who are irreplaceable are rarely challenged, rarely ignored, and almost never crossed. When you cultivate the right presence, the right energy, and the right psychological leverage, people start valuing you in ways they never noticed before. Ordinary influence becomes unquestioned authority. Society has spent centuries conditioning you to be useful, agreeable, and predictable, convincing you that being needed or liked is enough. From childhood, we are trained to perform, to follow rules, to seek validation. But here's the brutal truth. The world doesn't reward goodness, obedience, or effort. It rewards scarcity. The lesson is clear. When you are replaceable, you are disposable. Most people, however, fail to understand this. They wear themselves thin trying to please, over-explaining themselves, bending to the expectations of others, constantly seeking approval. Every yes they give, every concession they make, sends a signal. I am replaceable. And the consequences are silent, but devastating. Colleagues stop seeking your input, friends gradually drift, and even loved ones take your presence for granted. You become invisible, a placeholder, quietly erased from the value equation. History is full of examples. Napoleon Bonaparte, despite his brilliance, understood this rule instinctively. He surrounded himself with those who could not be easily replaced, and ruthlessly removed those who could. Loyalty, he knew, was secondary. Scarcity and indispensability were the real currency of influence. The dangerous trait that flips this dynamic is psychological independence. The ability to operate without being emotionally dependent on others. It is freedom from approval, freedom from validation, and freedom from fear of loss. People are instinctively wired to fear what they cannot control or replace. And when you demonstrate this trait, you silently shift the balance of power. Imagine this: a friend who never seeks reassurance, a colleague who never begs for approval, a partner who never clings. Their presence becomes a psychological anchor, a scarcity the mind fixates on. You are no longer one of many. You are singular, irreplaceable, and feared to lose. Even in modern times, the same rules apply. Consider business tycoons like Steve Jobs. He wasn't liked by everyone. In fact, many found him harsh, difficult, or even cruel. But his presence was indispensable. The fear of losing him, of seeing him replaced, gave him authority far beyond formal titles or polite respect. This is why most people fail to cultivate the dangerous trait. It requires detachment from approval, control over emotional availability, and a mastery of scarcity in relationships and presence. It is uncomfortable, often lonely, and contrary to everything we are taught to value. But that discomfort is precisely what makes it powerful. Look closer at human behavior. People stop valuing what is abundant. They take for granted those who are always available, always agreeable, always present. But scarcity triggers instinctive fear, fear of loss, fear of regret, fear of missing out on something they cannot replace. This is the invisible lever of influence, that the strong use while the weak remain blind. Even on a smaller scale, in daily life, the principle applies. The person who disappears without explanation, who enforces boundaries without apology, who does not bend to whims. They command attention and respect effortlessly. Every subtle withdrawal, every moment of unavailability triggers the fear of losing them, and suddenly their influence multiplies without a word spoken. The takeaway is simple, yet shocking. The trait that makes people fear losing you is not charisma, intelligence, or even kindness. It is being impossible to replace. And the first step to cultivating this trait is awareness. Recognizing how often you have been disposable, overlooked, or taken for granted because you sought approval instead of creating scarcity. Once you understand this, you start to reshape your presence, your behavior, and your psychological impact. You no longer compete for validation. You command value by scarcity. You stop chasing attention. Attention begins to chase you. The shift is silent, subtle, but irrevocable. Now that the illusion has been shattered, that being liked or needed is not enough, the next step is understanding why people cling to those they cannot control. The mind naturally fears loss more than it respects value. This is where the psychology of fear, scarcity, and emotional independence becomes the next tool in your arsenal. People don't truly fear what they respect. They fear what they cannot control. Think about it. A person who always seeks approval can be ignored, replaced, or manipulated at will. But someone who operates on their own terms, who is emotionally independent and scarce, becomes a force that triggers instinctive fear. Let's dive into the dark psychology behind fear, scarcity, and control, and why people naturally cling to those they can't dominate. Imagine a general who holds the battlefield, not by numbers, but by the fear he instills in his enemies. Imagine a leader whose absence causes panic, because no one else can fill the void. Machiavelli wrote centuries ago, "It is safer to be feared than loved." The human mind is wired to attach fear to scarcity, not admiration to abundance. When people cannot replace you, they instinctively cling, not because of respect, not because of loyalty, but because losing you would hurt more than they can bear. This is the hidden psychological advantage you can cultivate. The dangerous trait that makes people stop taking you for granted and start fearing your absence. Most people misunderstand fear. They think fear is about aggression, intimidation, or loud dominance. Real fear is quiet, invisible, and often internal. It's the anxious awareness of loss, the subtle panic that something essential might slip away. And this is exactly what makes certain individuals psychologically irreplaceable. Fear is stronger than love. Neuroscience confirms it. The human brain prioritizes loss aversion over gains. People obsess over losing what they value, far more than acquiring something new. When you cultivate emotional independence, scarcity, and selective availability, you trigger this instinctive mechanism. You become a psychological anchor, and people begin to invest more to regain control. Emotional independence is the linchpin. The person who doesn't need validation, reassurance, or constant attention becomes unsettlingly powerful. Historical examples abound. Alexander the Great didn't rely on anyone's approval. He commanded respect through detachment and dominance, making those around him cling to his vision, fearful of losing his guidance. The modern world functions on the same principle. Consider innovators like Elon Musk. His teams often operate under pressure, navigating uncertainty, because his presence is irreplaceable. His decisions, vision, and risk-taking create a psychological dependency. People fear what they cannot predict or replace, and this fear drives obedience, loyalty, and obsession. But there is a subtle art to this. Fear must not become hatred. People must fear losing you without realizing it, or without seeing you as cruel or manipulative. This is why controlled scarcity is essential. By withdrawing attention, limiting availability, and avoiding overexposure, you create a psychological vacuum that others are compelled to fill. Even in relationships, this rule applies. The partner who is always available, always agreeing, always predictable, becomes background noise. But the one who is emotionally self-contained, selective, and scarce becomes unforgettable. Every interaction triggers anticipation, desire, and subtle fear of loss. The ordinary is ignored. The scarce becomes a psychological necessity. Machiavelli's advice resonates here. If you are indispensable, your influence is unchallengeable. Look at leaders like Genghis Khan. His generals were loyal not because of kindness, but because they feared the void he would leave if absent. His presence alone dictated allegiance. Scarcity and control amplified his authority beyond brute force. The dangerous trait, then, is not charisma or knowledge. It is being scarce, emotionally independent, and psychologically irreplaceable. When mastered, it forces people to value you in ways admiration never could. They no longer seek to please you. They cling because losing you would hurt too much. The next layer of power is subtle, detachment coupled with mystery. Human minds crave closure. They fear uncertainty. When you withhold yourself slightly, refuse to be fully predictable, and operate on your own terms, you trigger instinctive attention and unconscious attachment. People do not even realize why they cannot let you go. They just know they cannot. Even ordinary examples illustrate this. The colleague who only speaks when necessary, the friend who doesn't over-explain, the partner who enforces boundaries, all become psychologically expensive. Every interaction becomes valuable, every moment scarce. Ordinary presence becomes a commodity, and scarcity generates influence. By understanding this, you can reshape relationships, workplaces, and social dynamics. Influence is no longer about chasing attention or respect. Influence is about being the one they cannot replace and letting their own fear of loss do the work for you. Now that you understand why people cling to those they cannot control, the next step is embodying this principle. Awareness alone is insufficient. Now I will teach you how to become psychologically irreplaceable, how to turn scarcity into silent dominance, and how to make losing you the greatest fear anyone ever experiences. Once you master this, you no longer chase influence. Influence chases you. Most people spend their lives chasing approval, attention, or fleeting respect. But the truly dangerous, unchallengeable individuals don't chase anyone. They don't plead, explain, or overextend. They make themselves irreplaceable, and in doing so, they become feared to lose. Today, we're going to forge that mindset, the one trait that ensures people treat you differently forever. Imagine walking into a room and every conversation, every glance, every decision subtly orbits around your presence. Not because you demanded it, but because your absence would create a void that no one else could fill. Machiavelli wrote, "The presence of power is its own protection." The moment you become irreplaceable, the rules change. Influence is no longer granted. It is inherent, unquestionable, and unavoidable. This is the final step, moving from awareness to embodied power, where people don't just respect you, they fear the loss of you. The first step in becoming psychologically irreplaceable is detachment as a weapon. The weak fear confrontation. The powerful create absence deliberately. Consider Marcus Aurelius, the Stoic emperor. He rarely sought approval, yet those around him revered and feared his judgment. His detachment was not coldness, but strategic scarcity. By walking away first, by not clinging to outcomes, he controlled influence without demanding it. People feared losing his presence more than they loved it. The second step is boundaries without explanation. Most people weaken themselves by over-justifying their limits. Saying no with hesitation signals vulnerability. Saying no with calm, unyielding confidence creates instant respect. Historical figures like Queen Elizabeth I mastered this. Her court never knew where she would stand, and her selective accessibility kept advisors and rivals in constant anticipation. Next, you must become psychologically expensive to access. Time, attention, and energy are the currencies of influence. When freely given, they lose value. When scarce, they trigger unconscious obsession and fear of loss. The powerful, from Leonardo da Vinci to modern innovators like Steve Jobs, understood this. Their scarcity amplified their genius, authority, and control. People competed, maneuvered, and vied for their presence because it could not be taken for granted. But the transformation goes deeper. The irreplaceable mindset is not about ego or dominance for its own sake. It is about structuring your life so your value is unmistakable and scarce, so that losing you would be catastrophic to others' plans, emotional stability, or social equilibrium. Every action, every withdrawal, every calculated appearance is a psychological lever. By selectively revealing your skills, presence, and influence, you create a magnetic pull. People become subconsciously invested, not because you demand it, but because they cannot replace what you offer. Even in relationships, this is evident. The emotionally abundant partner, who does not chase, over-explain, or cling commands deeper attachment. Every interaction, every display of independence strengthens their psychological gravity. They are not just loved. They are feared to lose. History provides countless examples. Genghis Khan's generals, Napoleon's advisors, Cleopatra's allies, all were drawn into loyalty, not by promises, but by the fear of losing someone strategically indispensable. This is the invisible thread of power that connects leadership, relationships, and social influence across centuries. Modern psychology confirms it. Scarcity, unpredictability, and emotional independence trigger neurological responses linked to attachment and fear of loss. The brain fixates on what it cannot replace. You are no longer competing for attention. Attention competes for you. The final step is the internalization of this mindset. Awareness is not enough. You must embody detachment, scarcity, and independence in thought, action, and presence. When you do, your influence becomes effortless. You no longer negotiate respect. Respect follows automatically. You no longer plead for loyalty. Loyalty becomes instinctive. You no longer chase influence. Influence chases you. The danger of this mindset and its power is that it is often invisible to those around you. They do not know why they cannot replace you, why your absence creates unease, why your presence commands attention. But they feel it instinctively, and that fear of loss becomes a silent, unshakable anchor. In essence, the irreplaceable mindset is not about domination through fear, but mastery through scarcity, presence, and independence. It is the ultimate form of psychological leverage, the trait that ensures people never take you for granted again. Now, You know the dangerous truth. People fear losing what they cannot replace. But knowledge is nothing without action. The next step is application. Turning this mindset into daily habits, behaviors, and strategies that ensure you remain psychologically irreplaceable in every sphere of life. When mastered, the world stops dictating your value. You define it. You control it. And losing you becomes the greatest fear anyone ever experiences.